Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Jim Jorgenson, and today we'll be taking a look at Visante's top 10 report, doing a mid-year check-in. And joining me for this are Visante senior executives Alex Varkey and Dave Hager. You guys have both been on the show before, so welcome back.
Thanks, Jim. Glad to be back and kind of share what we've learned so far this year. Excited to talk a little bit more.
Excellent. Well, let's start with some general observations. At the beginning of the year, as always, Visante publishes the top 10 forces shaping health system pharmacy. And now that we're halfway through the year, what really stands out to each one of you?
Yeah, so my take is we did a pretty good job in terms of like what we predicted and where we thought the industry was going to have in store for our clients and for the people we work with. I would say if there was one surprise to me, it was really at the end of 2025, looking into 2026. I think the workforce concerns were really top of mind for pharmacy leaders. And what we've seen is that given some of the rebounds in residency applications, school of pharmacy enrollment, I feel like people are more comfortable with where they are from a workforce pipeline perspective than I would have thought. I really believe that it was going to be a multi-year problem that was going to continue to pose challenges. And I think that has moved down the priority list for a number of the people we work with in the industry. I'm not exactly sure if that's the most strategic response yet, but definitely it has moved to a lower priority level than I would have predicted.
Yeah, I would agree with exactly what Dave mentioned. I think from a workforce standpoint, definitely the concerns as it related to workplace well-being, what was happening as it relates to pharmacy personnel, their desire to want to continue working within, the pharmacy space or the health system space. I think some of those things have definitely evened out a bit. Obviously, I think one of the biggest things that stood out over this first half of the year is that, and perfectly in line with I think the top 10 that we put out, is just how quickly we've moved from looking at pharmacy as more of an operational focus and wanting to ensure that we're doing everything the right way as it relates to cost savings or ensuring regulatory compliance. We're really looking at overall enterprise strategy, where patients are, within the continuum of care, and how pharmacy can really be a solution across all phases. And I think that's become even more important as we're starting to see some of the impact of, the IRA and some of the impact that it's having as it relates to drug costs and budgeting overall for health systems.
Looking across the industry and the report in its entirety, what developments have reinforced the predictions you guys made, and what, if anything, has surprised you?
So, in reviewing all the articles, I think the one about what pharmacy leaders really want to say about pharmacy, and I think we played with that title a little bit. We think we were going to be a little bit punchier at one point, which was really the nature of that article was, hey, what do pharmacy leaders want to say, but maybe don't have the right venue to say it as directly as they could. And to me, uncertainty in the 340B space is directly highlighted in that article. And I certainly think that prediction has more than come true. Like Alex can share a little bit more about his, recent experiences at conferences where, again, this continues just to dominate the national conversation within pharmacy. So certainly we predicted that uncertainty, and I don't think that was a stretch. What I didn't anticipate and should have is that uncertainty slowing investments in pharmacy to the degree that it has. So, um, don't know what the overall strategy is necessarily, but what I'm seeing is that because there's just so much smoke out there about the program, it is really causing organizations to really take a step back and say, what is safe to pursue right now? and where do we want to make investments? And it's, I think, slowing investment, it's slowing strategic action as a result. And I think that's going to be a push we're going to have to make through the second half of the year is how can we get back past that paralysis?
Yeah, I think the prediction of 340B really being the most, volatile policy and financial issue that health systems are considering. I think that we were spot on as it relates to that part of the conversation. As Dave mentioned, I think one of the challenges is that, health systems may be in one of two camps. The first camp is one where hospitals understand the value of pharmacy services and the need to invest in them, and really seeing pharmacy as a hallmark for revenue generation in addition to being part of cost saving strategies. Then there are those health systems that will continue to see pharmacy only as a cost center, and looking to pharmacy leaders to only reduce costs as opposed to really thinking through how can we integrate the pharmacy leader into more of our enterprise strategy conversations and seeing how we can provide better care and at the same time, also mind the bottom line. And so I think one of the things where, we've seen that just in conversations with health system pharmacy leaders is, how surprised is the CFO about drug costs and managing drug costs with the IRA impact and with sort of the MFA impact on some of the Part D drugs, knowing that that's going to continue to expand as time goes on. Those that understood and are well connected to their pharmacy leader as far as what to expect for those budgets probably planned for it a bit better than those that didn't. And so I think it really highlights the need for pharmacy leaders to be part of the conversation at the very top as it relates to budgeting and planning for the future.
Let me follow up on that just a little bit. If you're a health system CEO or CFO or COO or CPO, what's the one pharmacy trend you can no longer afford to ignore and you just have to look at investing in?
To me, um, I've been able to do a number of kind of assessments over this first half of the year. So this is often where health systems may come to us at Visant and say, hey, I think there's more we can get in pharmacy, but I'm not exactly sure where, not exactly sure to what degree, and I'm not exactly sure where I should start. Or I've decided to make a transition to pharmacy as like a strategic partner, but I want to make sure I've got the structure and priorities right. So we do a number of these types of engagements. And in doing that work and sitting down with clients, to me, the area that continues to come up is we've built this ambulatory infusion program. It's really strong. It has its roots in oncology because that is where we started to deliver ambulatory infusion. And there hasn't been a whole lot of strategic thought that has gone into the areas outside of oncology. And so when I butt that up against what is in the pipeline of what pharma is developing, given our rise in chronic disease states in this country, the fact that people are living longer, a lot of those are biologic infused drugs in the non-oncology space, right? Oncology, a lot of older drugs now, cheaper drugs are given in infusion centers. A lot of that has moved to oral therapies for maintenance. So we have, in my opinion, these structures that are still very focused on cancer care. I understand why cancer care is a signature program at many of the hospitals we work with. Totally respect that and think it needs to be invested in. But when I compare that to the growth opportunities in the non-onc infusion space, particularly the specialty non-onc infusion space, that's a lot of GI rheumatology, anti-inflammatory drugs, neurology drugs that are being infused today. And the pipeline of those drugs, I just don't think health systems can ignore what is happening in those spaces. And I think that opportunity continues to just grow and grow and grow as I look at that drug pipeline.
Yeah, completely agree with Dave. As it relates to more opportunity that's yet to be explored, it's one of those things that you can't really continue to afford looking at specialty pharmacy, site of care strategy, as its own silo. You can't look at 340B as sort of just this compliance situation where you're just wanting to ensure that you get past the next, potential HRSA audit, that it really is about looking at overall opportunity to maximize the ability to care for patients, obviously number one, but also to keep the lights on, proverbially speaking, for health systems. There's lots of opportunity that's there that really you can't afford to ignore. I think this this thought that specialty pharmacy is in one silo, that 340B is in another, and that these teams shouldn't necessarily talk to one another or be part of a shared strategic enterprise strategy, solution development type team. I think it's time to really ditch the silo mindset as it relates to financial management, that one department's finances are completely different from the others. The rev cycle conversation between hospital rev cycle and medication rev cycle is really one conversation, and I think that's something that um, you know determining who needs to be invited to those conversations shouldn't even be a conversation at all. That pharmacy obviously needs to have a seat at all of the tables as it relates to how to manage medication management strategy within health systems.
Let's jump to a few of the key prediction topics. The first being pharmacy's evolution from cost center to growth engine, and pharmacy actually getting a strategic seat at the table. And Alex, I wanted to pick up on your observation of the two camps. What are the biggest differences between health systems that view pharmacy as a strategic asset versus those that still view it primarily as a cost center?
Yeah, I think I mentioned there were two camps where there's those health systems where pharmacy truly has a seat at the table, and one where pharmacy is totally seen as just a cost center. And I think starting with the health systems where pharmacy is primarily seen as a cost center, obviously the measures of focus are going to be, looking at the drug budget, determining variances and what the cause of those variances are, looking at your overall labor costs and what can you do to, determine new models that, are able to more so utilize technology to gain efficiencies as opposed to really understanding the value that each personnel member within the pharmacy team offers as relates to patient care. There's more so of a focus on, inventory management and compliance as it relates to just sort of that cost center focus. Then there's that second camp where pharmacy is really seen as part of the enterprise strategy for the health system. They're looking at, leakage data as it relates to where patients are maybe perhaps leaving health systems and finding care somewhere else, whereas more opportunities for the same healthcare teams that are managing the patient in-house are still able to have connections to those patients outside, finding ways where the health system can truly take care of the patient and all of their needs. Um, Having the pharmacy leader integrated into those conversations allows for those health systems to take better care of those patients, and at the same time helps the bottom line as well. And so I think there's definitely a difference between how those two health systems focus, and it's usually the health systems where they see pharmacy as an integral part of enterprise strategy, where they're able to maximize their success, not just in revenue management, but also patient care.
Yeah, I think Alex is hitting on the right message there in that part of it is whether or not the organization has been sophisticated enough to really, instead of rolling all of pharmacy up and all of drug expense up into one line that is here's a cost we need to control. Like, how can I really segment the work that is taking place in pharmacy instead of treating it like a monolith? And to me, that it part drives those two pieces. And I think the other like key component there is what kind of relationship and trust is present there. Um, if don't have a ton, like, let's just be honest. I think pharmacy finance it's complicated. It is not easy because of the complicated ways drugs are reimbursed in the various settings that we're in. And it's not just an equation we can use universally for every drug dollar that an organization spends within a health system. And sometimes I feel like because it's difficult to understand, it can feel like the pharmacy leader is like playing games with how the numbers all play out when it's actually really straightforward once you start to do that segmentation. And then because there isn't trust about the numbers, there's difficulty in understanding why the numbers change based on the environment that we're talking about. And then it just feels like maybe this is just too hard to understand. It's easier to understand. Like when I cath a person, I in this environment, I get paid this amount. I roughly know what our costs are. We're gonna make money, and like that's easier in some ways, even though in many ways that there's just as much pressure on that outpatient cath that there is on drug expenses, but it comes down to like that feels more durable to some folks. They've understood those finances for longer. And so it's just easier to keep pharmacy in that cost center structure and then think about revenue opportunities in more traditional ways around procedures and surgeries and days. And so I think that's the gap we have to continue to work to close is if we all agree that there are lots of hospitals and health system in this country where they are now mostly a pharmacy who, from a financial perspective, they are mostly a pharmacy that operates a hospital. How do we then make sure we're apportioning time and strategy and effort in that similar fashion? We're going to really think about how that pharmacy business impacts the rest of what we do. And for some reason, we just haven't universally gotten there.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of my favorite engagements when I was out in the field for Visant, we did a major upgrade of specialty and infusion in 340B for a large academic medical center. And after 14 months, pharmacy moved from 41% of contribution margin to 72%. And when the chief pharmacy officer presented those results to the Board of Regents, the chancellor made the statement that it would appear that our hospitals and health systems are not just a loss leader for our pharmacy, which was
Mhm.
true.
Yep. Yep. And I think what's surprising then, Jim, to me is like Alex did a great job of describing how there are two different camps. Both camps see that fact the same, but respond in diametrically different ways to that fact. Some say, that's great. Let's lean in. Let's push that further. Let's be opportunistic. The other group says, that's uncomfortable to me. Let's see where this goes, even though it's been true for many years.
So, what conversations are you guys hearing CEOs and CFOs having today about pharmacy that they really weren't having 3 or 4 years ago?
I think, as it relates to the impact of, two of the most recent changes within the last 3 or 4 years, obviously the Inflation Reduction Act and its impact as it relates to drug pricing management, maximum fair price being established as it relates to Medicare Part D drugs and a select list of those. That list is going to expand. So I think a lot of their questions as it relates to that impact are obviously going to be different than the questions they were asking 3 or 4 years ago. Namely, how is maximum fair pricing going to impact our overall drug budget and how we manage drug expenditures within our health system. I think one of the other major points of impact, obviously, is changes within 340B. So if we ultimately do see a change from offering discounts up front to a rebate model widespread across all manufacturers, how is that ultimately going to change how we manage the drug supply chain within our health systems? Obviously, the same revenue cycle questions obviously are going to still come up as it relates to claims management, denials management. What are ways that we can do those things better? I think those are some of the key questions that I believe CEOs and CFOs are having today as it relates to pharmacy strategy.
Yeah, I think centrally now, when we meet with CFOs at conferences and other places, they all bring up organically like, oh, and here's what we're doing in the 340B space. Here's where I know we are today and where, like where we have concerns. That was not always my experience, but now I think everybody has realized that for me to really understand the financial positioning in the short and long term for my health system and its sustainability, I need to understand that program, where we are, and just making sure we're playing by the rules and staying in the bounds there. So to me, that language has become more universal when it wasn't something that I've always seen.
For those organizations in that first pharmacy camp, what signals really tell you that pharmacy's earned a seat at the executive table?
I think I think back to my time when I was a hospital pharmacy director, and when I truly felt like I had a seat at the table was when I wasn't the last to find out about some major change that was going to happen. I think that's probably the key indicator for me that if your chief pharmacy officer, your vice president of pharmacy is included on the front end of a strategic decision for the health system, that's when you know they have a seat at the executive table. It's usually in those instances where a health system pharmacy leader is the last to find out about a major change as it relates to, managing labor costs or managing services or not necessarily being part of the conversation as it relates to site of care strategy, for example. I think those are key instances where you know that there needs to be some further work as it relates to ensuring that the CPO is at the table and part of those conversations strategically, so that not just to drive the conversation, but to really understand what's happening at the enterprise level, the health system level. What are the concerns, and really be a team player in those conversations and helping health system leaders who may not be familiar with all the opportunities for pharmacy to provide positive influence towards patient care strategy as well as maximizing revenue potential. Being part of those conversations earlier tend to be more formidable for health systems in the long run.
It sounds like Alex and I have the same shared trauma, and maybe we can use part of this to like provide some therapy to others in the field. But I when I was thinking about this, to me, it's about kind of like a couple practical things that I'd really encourage people to think through. When I think about what does the output of having a pharmacy leader in a strategic position look like, I think it's a couple of things. One is when I see that the pharmacy leader is actually at the executive team level meeting, wherever the CEO meets with their direct reports to set strategy, whatever the organization calls that, like, does the pharmacy leader actually have an official chair there? Not one of these things where it's like once every 6 months they're brought in to explain what's happening in pharmacy, but are actually a consistent presence where we're thinking about pharmacy and medications as part of our overall strategy, given the scale of it within our health system. I think the second one is, have we thought about board presence and like where does the pharmacy leader have some connections with the health system board? Is it through the finance group? Is it through the quality and safety group? Is it at the overall board? Again, that may not be I'm good with like not a standing seat there for sure, but like how could that be, a routine thing where boards are really thinking about where pharmacy fits into the overall strategy? I think thirdly, it's about medications follow our patients everywhere. They're deeply tied to our payer strategy and our provider strategy. How are we making sure when we're thinking about where we're going to strategically add providers to capture market share? Guess what? Those providers are going to prescribe a lot of medications. Medications are the number one intervention that takes place in American healthcare. If that is the case, shouldn't we have pharmacy be at the table? We're talking about what we're going to grow. And if there's margin and value associated with what pharmacy services need to come alongside those new providers, so we can actually be proactive in how we provide that service instead of, again, maybe this is shared trauma. Like it's like, oh, by the way, we blew out this program. We're going to have 15 more cardiologists coming. Alex, when are you going to get us set up to provide those services, right? Have you ever had that call?
Yeah, yeah, thanks for letting me know. That's
Yeah.
usually how I start my response.
So it's
I'll get
that.
right on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do we get aligned with, okay, that's what we're doing with our providers. What are we negotiating with our payers? How does pharmacy and medication reimbursement like contribute to that conversation. Again, if we accept that we are now in many health systems a pharmacy that happens to have a hospital, why aren't we talking about the pharmacy strategy in alignment with our payer and provider strategy? And that means deeper connections with the pharmacy leader and the CFO, the CMO, the CSO to make sure that those things are happening in concert, so that when we're putting together the full business case, we're thinking about the investments needed to the pharmacy and then the return on investment associated with that in pharmacy, instead of treating the pharmacy revenue and margin as upside we didn't factor in.
Couldn't agree more. One of my favorite stories as the chief pharmacy officer, the organization decided to convert 15 med surge beds to 15 more BMT beds. Thought the drug spend should stay the same because the patient days were the same.
Perfect. Good luck with that.
Yep, exactly. That was great.
I don't even want to know what the variance was in the drug budget the first few months.
Little shock when he saw it. The second topic I want to explore highlighted pharmacies at a crossroads and a time for entrepreneurial growth. And I think one of the boldest predictions in the report was that pharmacy leaders would need to become more entrepreneurial. So, what does that mean in today's environment? And are you guys actually seeing that happen?
Yeah, I think fundamentally to me, what this looks like is having pharmacy leaders speaking the language of strategy. And I think that is a word that's like used a lot, hard to define. People can get, I think, quickly lost in what strategy looks like. And to me, I think part of that is like, how can we better frame pharmacy in terms of market share and what we're going to go get? What are our competitors in this space? How do we have advantages? I think when we start to reframe pharmacy in that way, instead of in framing it in terms of a service as an operation, like then we can start to have people see pharmacy in a new light. I'll let Alex comment a little bit more, since he, was recently at some conferences really engaging with a lot of pharmacy leaders. But my understanding is, unfortunately, through the first half of the year, given the other uncertainty out in the marketplace, a lot of pharmacy leaders are back to playing defense around FTE and those things, and how we bend the cost curve. And so while I think our encouragement was spot on in terms of pushing people to be more entrepreneurial and have a strategic mindset, I'm not sure that the marketplace, given the other financial pressures, has responded like we would have hoped.
Yeah. Um, couldn't agree more with Dave as relates to this particular point. I've talked a lot about the need for having the pharmacy leader, be at the table and have a seat at the table. And I don't mention that thinking that just having a seat at the table is going to ultimately solve the problem. I think there's a mindset change that needs to happen for pharmacy leaders en masse as it relates to having that opportunity to be part of those conversations. And it starts with exactly what Dave mentioned earlier as it relates to an operational mindset. If you're leading a health system pharmacy team, you're responsible for thousands of doses going to patients each and every day, 5 to 7 opportunities for error in each of those. That's, over 125, 150,000 opportunities for error that you might be managing in any single day. And so that's a lot of systems, a lot of people, a lot of policy decisions. It can be really easy to focus on the operational aspects of pharmacy. And in most health systems, that's exactly what a health system executive is expecting from their pharmacy leader. And so when you're in that mindset, having the conversation about growth, taking on more volume, can lead to a lot more anxiety as opposed to really looking at it as an opportunity. And I think once you transition a part of that mindset towards being more entrepreneurial and really seeing growth as an opportunity to take care of more patients, to provide better care, to open up opportunities for sustainability for health systems as it relates to revenue opportunities. I think that's when you're able to really almost kill two birds with one stone. With more money comes more mission, right? And so having the opportunity to have good conversations about what growth looks like within your specialty pharmacy strategy, within site of care strategy, how you're managing more patients, what that looks like as it relates to resource management so that you can continue to take care of more patients. I think that's when you see the shift in the conversation and the shift in that pharmacy leader really being part of the solution as opposed to playing defense, as Dave mentioned perfectly earlier.
Where are health systems finding the greatest entrepreneurial opportunities right now? You guys mentioned specialty, infusion, maybe PBMs or something else entirely.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've seen, and at Visant, we've gotten probably more requests around over the last 6 months, maybe even more than we predicted, was um, pharmacy leaders and health systems understanding that actually a different way to elevate the discourse around pharmacy as a strategic partner is to use the concept of a consolidated service center or a consolidated pharmacy service center to raise everybody's eyes out of operating and take a step back and say, what if we built this building instead? What if we centralized our services? What if we thought about pharmacy across our system and how we deliver it differently than we do today? What services could we include? What are the value of expanding those services? So I think it's been a really smart move by entrepreneurial pharmacy leaders who may have tried some of the other things we've suggested, haven't necessarily gotten as far as they've wanted to get, to use a partnership with a group like Visa to help show the value that you could generate through pharmacy in a new light. And maybe that results in a new building and the excitement of building that. And sometimes it just results in a better understanding of overall pharmacy strategy from an enterprise level, and allows, I think, leaders inside and outside of pharmacy to view pharmacy in a new, maybe more strategic light. And so I think there's more work there. Even if you aren't convinced you need a building today, let's dive into like what that would look like and start to put some numbers around it.
Yeah, I think Dave mentioned this earlier in our conversation, but obviously lots of opportunities to explore, where specialty pharmacy or, infusion services can expand influence as it relates to patient care and focusing on different patient groups that perhaps hasn't been the focus in prior iterations or, starting to see patients within those particular service lines going elsewhere for their care, or how health systems can actually capture more of that and keep those patients within the health system. I think that's obviously a big opportunity. I think Dave really mentioned a very important point as it relates to partners like Visant being a great solution for health systems. Going back to the scenario I mentioned earlier of and maybe there's a little bit of my own personal trauma and speaking about that, operational pharmacy leader really honing in on, oh my gosh, how are we going to handle, 10% volume growth year over year? And, our FTE line just continues to be flat. And, how do we manage within that particular space? It really, it takes, it does take a shift in mindset as it relates to how we look at pharmacy enterprise strategy and how we can open up the opportunity to take care of more patients and at the same time help the health system feed the bottom line so that we can provide more services overall to the communities that we serve. There's so many things that we're still having to focus on as an operational leader that we're not going to be able to think about those entrepreneurial things as readily because we're just maybe not resourced that way, or perhaps we haven't had an opportunity to explore and think more strategically because things just continue to happen in droves each and every day. And that's where partnerships with organizations like VSAN really can help those health system leaders not tackle things that they aren't capable of tackling, but actually having the resources in tow to be able to look at their pharmacy enterprise strategy in a more holistic way, so that they really can be part of the solution and helping their health systems as a whole in improving their enterprise strategy.
The economic environment, to say the least, for the first half of the year has been pretty volatile. How has that impacted leadership's willingness to invest in pharmacy growth initiatives?
Yeah, I think what I've seen is, there's been a lot of impacts from the O triple B or whatever we want to call it, the one big beautiful bill, um, pushing downward reimbursement, increasing the amount of charity care that health systems are providing. And so, organizations are still, it is not uncommon when I meet with senior leaders for them to go back to COVID and say, like, this goes back to 2020. We're still dealing with some of the repercussions from that. We still have temporary staff and agency staff. We still have increased labor expenses, and now we're seeing pressures on the reimbursement side. We factored some of this in, but not as much as we had expected. And so I have seen kind of a doubling down of the like, we got to bend the cost curve. The increases in operating expense are not aligning with kind of our revenue lines. And so I think that can sometimes cause people to, instead of thinking about how we grow the revenue line, get really focused on bending the cost curve. And my experience over the last 6 months is that has only ramped up because of the reimbursement pressure on hospital and outpatient environments.
I learned very early on as a hospital pharmacy executive that job one was to ensure that the revenue lines and the expense lines never crossed.
Yeah.
And job number two was see job number one. And so that essentially is, I think that environment is definitely, what health system leaders are dealing with today, where there's more and more risk of those lines crossing. And so if I'm a pharmacy leader in today's environment and I'm looking to justify a new service or justify new technology implementation or new service implementation, you really want to ensure if you're going to go to your CFO or CEO for approval that you have all of your ducks in a row and you have your volume assumptions are clear. You know full well what's going on as relates to the environment, what your payer mix is, any margin projections are accurate, what technology you're going to need in order to do that, what compliance risks there may be, and ensuring that you have support from the top down as relates to outside departments being part of the conversation, whether it's your IT teams, your legal teams, just so that once you've provided a proposal, there aren't these separate conversations that are being had about your proposal without you in the room, but actually all of those departments were already part of the conversation, and so everyone's in support of this new service or new thing to invest in, and so there is greater pressure now than probably ever before on health system pharmacy leaders to really have all of those ducks in a row before having that first conversation to ensure that you're able to get that support for further investment.
The last topic I want to discuss deals with pharmacy hitting a plateau and then being able to move past that and unlock untapped value. Because I think what we see is many organizations, they've already captured the obvious pharmacy opportunities, but now they're stalled. So what does that pharmacy plateau look like in practice? And, why do some health systems stall after early success?
I think some of that pharmacy plateau probably has to do with some of the conversation we had earlier as it relates to the two camps, whether your primary focus is cost management or whether your primary focus is growth. I think some of the initial wins that you may have in further focus on cost savings, you've optimized your purchasing strategy, you've looked at your formulary and you've closed things off where you need to, and you've ensured that proper restrictions are in place to ensure that care is happening where it needs to happen, whether it's on the ambulatory care side or whether it's happening in-house. You have some basic strategies as it relates to your 340B overall strategy. You're still primarily focused on compliance, perhaps haven't looked at opportunities for optimization. I think that's probably where it's time to have continued conversations, partnering with organizations like us where we have the experts to be able to provide support for those pharmacy leaders and those healthcare executives to better understand where their opportunities may lie. I think that's essentially where a lot of these organizations that have always been or traditionally been cost center or focused as it relates to their pharmacy enterprise strategy. And there's obviously the next step that needs to be taken. And of course, that's a perfect opportunity to partner with a group like Visant to help you get to that next level.
Alex, I like what you had there, particularly like what I see a lot of times is kind of like, let's take where we were last year. Let's apply some new measure to it based on volumes. There we go. That's our budget for the year. Let's build in some growth um, based on last year's performance. And I think that makes sense when we don't have all the tools we could or should have to really say, okay, what was our strategy this year? What is going to be different about our strategy in the next year? Where are we going to go after targeting new market share? And like, what do we know is out there? I feel like, and you know this really well, like the kind of like operating budget sprint. Like there isn't a whole lot of conversation around strategy in that. There isn't time to go slow, and really be able to articulate like, okay, here's where we really want to go. If we actually treated pharmacy like a business within a business, if we had all the access to data insights we needed to go segment our marketplace and decide where to go after, like we could actually be in a much better position. And so to me, the pharmacy plateau is very real at many places because we can't scale pharmacy like we should as a business within a business, and we don't have the data we need to break through that plateau.
Yeah, for organizations that do feel stuck, where should they focus to reignite growth?
You know, I think for any organization that is stuck as it relates to their pharmacy enterprise strategy, you know, again, and not to make this sound too much like a, you know, a sales episode, if you will, but I really do think looking at your entire pharmacy enterprise and doing a value assessment is absolutely the next step, right? For any organization where they may feel that, you know, their pharmacy enterprise strategy has gone stagnant, that there isn't much opportunity for growth, or they've seen their specialty volumes, they've kind of stayed the same, you know, year over year, or, you know, they haven't quite figured out the right strategy as it relates to denials management on the rev cycle side. You know, where's their opportunity on the 340B side that hasn't been maximized yet? Or, you know, are we still primarily only focused on, you know, risk and compliance as it relates to 340B strategy? These are all things that could be important conversation starters with the right partner in place to look at the data to see what the data shows as it relates to current strategy, where there may be some opportunities where other health systems have been able to be successful in taking better care of their patients and also, you know, optimizing the bottom line and ensuring those revenue and expense lines don't cross. I think that's a great place to start for any health system that might be stuck right now.
Yeah, and Alex, if an organization can't do that, obviously we would want and would welcome the chance to do that. If you can't, I think then you need to work with internal partners outside of pharmacy to get something similar. So that means stepping back with your payer strategy folks, with your chief strategy officer, or with your medical group leaders to understand what's happening in the strategy space and the payer space and the provider space, and then where pharmacy can move in. I think that's really challenging sometimes for pharmacy leaders. Those conversations are, to your point, very different than the operational expectations that are often put on pharmacy leaders. But um, if you can't get a partner to help you, I think you got to find those internal partners to help you take that big step back and really reset on where pharmacy fits into those larger organizational strategies for you to win.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Dave. Like when you're thinking about departments, it's not just, you know, finance or revenue cycle. It's legal, it's,
Yep.
you know, compliance, it's supply chain. Pharmacy touches every service line and therefore ultimately has some stake in all the departments within a health system. And so having an internal team of leaders from all of those departments being part of the same conversation would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think another place that pharmacy gets stuck is when they need additional funds to expand. Sometimes the C-suite just isn't used to seeing multi-million-dollar requests coming out of the pharmacy. If radiology asks for multi-million dollars for a new CT scanner, no big deal because they always see that. But a pharmacy is asking for $5 or $6 million to expand retail and specialty pharmacy. That looks different. So
Mhm.
sometimes just bringing in an expert voice that can validate that ask is all it takes to unstick them.
Great.
Completely agree.
So what does that next wave of pharmacy value creation look like over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think again in this theme of larger strategic discussions, one of the things I think progressive health systems are really going to start to do in an increasingly rigorous fashion is they're going to start, like any good strategy, with what is taking place with their population in their areas. So like where is growth occurring in terms of population growth? What are the conditions associated with that population? Therefore, what providers do we need to have in what types of environments? And then I think the part that often gets missed there is then what are the medication use needs that are going to be alongside that, not just how many knees we're going to have to replace, how many hips we're going to have to work on, how many caths we need to complete, but like patients are going to need medications for every month for the rest of their lives. Like, how are we factoring that into our overall pharmacy and health system strategy to improve the health of the populations that we serve?
Yeah, Jim, I think about that example that you mentioned earlier about, beds turning into BMT beds, and it aligns perfectly with Dave's point where you may be seeing environmental changes that are influencing patients that are coming into the hospital. But when you're not thinking about the different nuances as it relates to the medication therapies required for each of those service line expansions, you're really missing a major component of the picture. And it may affect your drug budget short term, but it may affect so many other things as it relates to your long-term strategies and solutions within the health system. And so I think Dave's spot on as it relates to looking at what's happening within your community and your service area, keeping up with those changes, but not just thinking about whether those patients have a seat or a spot or a bed within the health system, but
Yeah,
what's it going to take to truly provide the best care for that patient? And 10 times out of 10, it's going to have a medication component to that strategy.
100%.
So wrapping up and looking ahead, for the second half of 2026, which of the top 10 trends do you think are going to accelerate the fastest?
I'm going to take the easy one. I'll leave Alex with the hard one. I'm going to say that it's going to be noise about 340B is going to continue to ramp up. We have Cassidy's statement this week. It'll be something else next week. I think that's going to cause another round of kind of defensive actions, by which I mean health systems are going to become more and more conservative through the end of 2026 in terms of their strategic investments. And that brings me some concern. We've been talking a lot today about how we better elevate our pharmacy strategy in alignment with other strategies. And I think we got to be careful about getting too defensive in this space.
Yeah, I think obviously 340B, but in addition to that, the IRA implementation and maximum fair pricing strategy or implementation is going to expand. Right now it's a select list of, uh, Part D drugs, but that's going to expand to Part B. It's going to expand to physician administered therapies. I think there's a lots more that CFOs, health system pharmacy leaders, and the like are going to have to think through as it relates to impact, not just from a budget standpoint, but patient access to care overall. I think those are things that will ultimately be impacted, and some of that may be predictable, and so there needs to be formidable planning conducted by health systems and all leaders to have them at the table to think through those impacts and ensure that the impact to the actual patient being taken care of is minimal.
Last question. If you can leave listeners with one piece of advice about pharmacy strategy, what's it going to be?
Yeah, so I would say if you get anything out of the conversation today, it's that pharmacy is not some new flash in the pan thing that like is like only an opportunity now because of certain drug pricing programs. Like pharmacy has been an increasing part of the care we deliver in health systems for like the last 40 years. And I think to continue to just put it in that cost center realm is short-sighted, frankly. And also I think relegates pharmacy to a place where we're only thinking about it as a financial driver. And Alex does a great job, and throughout this conversation has really highlighted again that like pharmacy at its core is about the care we provide to our patients, the quality and safety associated with a really complex set of events that we've set up in our country in order for patients to get access to their medications. And we need to make sure that our pharmacy strategy is, first of all, seen as a durable, long-lasting component of the care we provide in health systems, and that it needs to have the investments necessary for it to safely provide that care and expand access for patients to the things that they need to stay healthy.
Yeah, not much more I could say beyond what Dave just mentioned. But I mean, ultimately, what it comes down to, I think the organizations that win are going to be the ones that understand that pharmacy truly is a driver as it relates to overall margin, patient access to care, patient outcomes, patient loyalty to a health system. The more that you're actually focusing on where patients are leaving your system and receiving care elsewhere, and overall, just resilience of strategy as it relates to ensuring that those lines don't cross and that you're able to take better care of your community. I think the organizations that understand pharmacy being a driver of that are going to be the ones that come out on top.
Well, guys, thanks for all the work you put in to generate the top 10 report. And certainly thanks for covering out some time at the midpoint.
Great, thanks,
Appreciate
Jim.
the opportunity, Jim.
Excellent. And thanks everybody for listening.